Due Process, winner of 12 New York and Mid-Atlantic Emmys, including the 2008 award for Best Discussion Series.
The civil union law is a blight and embarrassment to the state of New Jersey. It has to be replaced by true equality, which is only marriage.
New Jersey's Civil Union Act. Has it meant equality for same-sex couples? A state commission now says no. So will New Jersey legalize gay marriage? That question and more on this edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy.
It was enacted under order from the state Supreme Court, designed to provide gay couples with all the benefits and responsibilities of marriage, while calling it something else. I'm Raymond Brown.
And I'm Sandra King, and the question 2 years later is, has it worked? The answer from a state commission is a unanimous no.
Make no mistake about it, this report is a 79-page indictment of New Jersey civil unions law, which is one of the biggest civil rights failures of our time anywhere in America.
Please be seated. It was the state Supreme Court 2 years ago that said same-sex couples could not be denied all the rights and responsibilities of marriage.
As long as the state of New Jersey does the right thing, will you marry me?
I will if you'll marry me.
I will.
But the court majority said you can call it something else, an option preferred and passed by a legislature that said civil unions would be just as good. So marriage in New Jersey continues to be reserved for heterosexual unions only.
If a particular church chooses to bless those unions and call it marriage, that's up to them. But the state ought to restrict marriage to the traditional one man, one woman, husband and wife, mommy and daddy model, because that's what works best for society.
But the commission's now put the pressure back on the State House with an unequivocal recommendation to legalize gay marriage and to do it now. And it's all a matter of one word?
Marriage.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah.
That's the big
Yeah.
word.
Among the reasons cited by the commission, the practical and psychological harm to gay couples and their children, and the illegality of a separate, inferior legal status implicit in the denial of the right to marry.
The civil union law is a blight and embarrassment to the state of New Jersey. It has to be replaced by true equality, which is only marriage.
The commission report, like same-sex marriage itself, is drawing mixed reviews. But will it spur the legislature to do what then Supreme Court Chief Justice Porritz had urged and grant same-sex couples the right to marry? For some answers to that question and more, we turn to Reverend Greg Quinlan, an activist with New Jersey Family First and the New Jersey Family Policy Council, and a staunch opponent of gay marriage. And in Newark, to Elder Kevin Taylor of the Inner Light Unity Fellowship Church, a gay activist and member of the Civil Union Study Commission. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Reverend Quinlan, let me start by asking you. 1 year was cut off of the study commission work. You've got an emphatic recommendation here to which the leaders of the legislature have already said this makes sense, and the governor has said he will sign gay marriage legislation. Is it over for your side? Are you ready to throw in the towel?
Absolutely not, because we have a difference here between right and wrong.
First of all, the Civil Unions Review Commission is extremely biased. There is not one person that sat on that commission that had any viewpoint that represented the rest of New Jersey, which is, supports marriage between one man and one woman. Secondly, the legislature hasn't heard from us, and that's the problem, and we're going to make sure that they do hear from us.
And you think you can stop the legislature from acting on gay marriage? What about the Supreme Court that's standing in the wings if, in fact, the legislature doesn't act?
The Supreme Court doesn't have the right to legislate from the bench, and that's exactly what it's done. And it's time for the court to act in its own position, its constitutional position, and stop dictating like an oligarchy to the rest of the society, including the state. So the people of New Jersey have really had enough of this nonsense, and it's time to put our children first and make marriage one man, one woman. Let the people decide, put it to a vote. Marriage is one man, one woman only.
Elder Taylor, the commission report itself is fairly lengthy, has a number of sections, and purports to represent findings taken on a number of occasions. If you had to identify one key aspect of the commission report for purposes of this discussion, what's the most important conclusion it reached that led it to conclude that we need to go to same-sex marriage?
I think the concern that is most unilateral is that we as a commission made it our business to hear from everyone. We went north and central and south. We had not only public hearings in each of the regions, but each and every one of our meetings, sans a few of our executive meetings, were public meetings.
Reverend Quinlan said he didn't have the opportunity
Reverend
to speak.
Quinlan was actually invited vigorously to our last meeting.
Vigorously? That's not true. I was scheduled to testify December 17th, which is tomorrow, sir. Tell the truth.
Specifically,
you're not telling the
meeting.
truth.
I am telling the absolute truth.
Well,
we have
boy,
the
you've got a different definition of truth, Elder.
to you, and I appreciate that you want to get loud, but that does not change the fact that
well,
we
I
were
appreciate it if you would tell the
in
truth, Elder.
correspondence with you specifically, not somebody on the opposing side, but you specifically, that you might testify before the November meeting of the commission, and that did not happen.
No, it didn't happen because you shut down the commission.
I heard you say earlier that you heard from Esther. Esther is the same woman who had been reaching out to people and same woman who works for
Esther called me the day before you wanted testimony originally. We had to reschedule.
We continue.
That is completely
we have for public
true.
record.
Elder Taylor, let me move a little bit.
We have a real problem
Elder
here.
Taylor, let me move a little
Elder.
bit past.
It's not
Elder Taylor,
that's on you.
Elder Taylor, let me move a little bit past the question of Reverend Quinlan's invitation to the broader issue raised by Reverend Quinlan, which is that this commission was in effect stacked. It wasn't fair.
I'm intrigued by that. As a person who sat in every meeting and know that there was Jew and Gentile and heterosexual and homosexual and married and single.
Were the members of the commission?
That's what I'm talking about. The
which
makeup
has been
of the commission.
accusation.
The makeup of the commission was gay and straight and black and white and married and single and heterosexual and homosexual and from every region of the state. The commission itself was made up of a variety of people from across the state.
But everyone on that commission had the viewpoint, the sole viewpoint, to have just marriage for homosexuals. That was the viewpoint. It was to include homosexuals and redefine the definition of marriage. That was the makeup of the commission. It did not have the viewpoint of anyone else who opposed same-sex marriage or opposed civil unions. It was totally stacked with people who supported gay marriage, period.
Reverend Quinlan, I appreciate you, again, getting vehement about this subject, but the commission came from various government appointees and the governor himself. And if you don't like the way that came about in the state of New Jersey, then that's not a conversation we can have right here. I know from inside the room that we had heated debates. I know that we spent hours on every word that went out, not only in this report, but in the report that we issued at our one-year mark. And again, you say that we weren't in communication with you, but the opposing side seemed to know how to show up when the camera when we were in Trenton and had the one-year issue report, you all showed up there to get loud and
what the elder's going to do is continue to talk.
Elder Taylor and Reverend Quinlan, let me shift ground a little bit from the issue about the commission to the substantive questions that underlie it. And I wanted to ask you a question as a personal and a policy component. You have a button that says ex-gay, it's okay.
That's right.
It leads me to ask a question based on your website, which is at one point you regarded yourself as gay, you no longer do. Does that change in orientation affect your policy outlook?
Oh, absolutely it does, because we now know no one's born a homosexual. We've mapped the human genome. We have a statement from Dr. Francis Collins, the former director of the National Genome Project. who said that homosexuality is not hardwired. There is absolutely zero evidence that shows anyone is born a homosexual.
Let me see if I can put it in other words, not to say that your words are inadequate, but does that mean that, for example, if someone on the commission or some other public body says not having gay marriage is bad because, your response is in part the people who are participating in that relationship have a choice to go and marry people of the opposite sex if they'll go through this conversion process?
Homosexuality is not innate. They have the right to change. Everyone has the right to self-determination. I've determined that after living the homosexual lifestyle, after watching 100 of my friends and acquaintances die of AIDS before I quit counting, that it was time for me to do something about it and to investigate. And when I found out that no one's born that way, when I found out what some of the causations were for the pathology of homosexuality, I decided to change.
Reverend Elder Taylor, if there are hearings in the legislature about the question of gay marriage, do you anticipate that the position that Reverend Quinlan just articulated, that it's a matter of choice and therefore the civil rights and the policy issues can be viewed differently? Do you anticipate that that issue will be discussed before the legislature when it begins to look at the question of whether we have gay marriage in New Jersey?
I think at this juncture, those kind of tangential questions may or may not be discussed, but the core of them is rooted in absurd logic. To suggest that that people have the right to change is suggesting that there is the right to not change, so that the people who are not changing have picked the right to not do something different, do something better. There are thousands, millions of people who would debunk the whole idea of whether or not homosexuality is hardwired, who can tell stories of knowing who they were orientation-wise from their youth. So if Reverend Quinlan says that he specifically doesn't feel that he specifically was hardwired a specific way, that does not in any way automatically innately dismiss thousands and millions of people who think differently. And it is those testimonies at every level, local and national, it's those testimonies, psychological and personal, that have to all be brought to the table. So if he lands on one side of it where it's not a choice for him, or it was a choice and he chose to change, then what about the millions who said, this is who I am, this is how I love?
But Elder Taylor, let me ask you, does it matter to the civil liberties question here? Does any of that make any difference? Would the basic precept of this commission, that separate is never equal, would that be the same whether or not you believe that being gay is a choice or not?
Well, I cannot speak on some of the things that have been spoken about here in concern without bringing into it the very religiosity that we're trying to make sure is separated by law. However, when you start talking about the one man, one woman, you innately go to the Bible, and you innately then go to this place of interpretation, that Adam was the one who suggested that because of this law, because of the presence of Eve, for that reason shall a man leave his father and his family and leave his father's home. And to suggest that now the reason we don't live in heaven is because Adam made the choice to leave there, because he got married and he decided that by his law he and Eve were to leave paradise. That is so fundamentally the core of this, that one man, one woman, and what it says to blended families where two people were married and then realized that they weren't married to the right person and then separated and then built separate families that now work. And so somebody has a family that includes two moms and two dads, and not in a homosexual way, but a stepmother and a stepfather, and they're building beautiful families. What I love about this country is that we are a loving, living, breathing, growing organism that realized at one point, hey, owning people and making them work for no wages is not good. Oops, we need to change that. Wow, the women of this country not being able to vote, that's not a good thing. We need to change that. That we are a people who understand the power and the purpose of change. And change has come in this context.
Let me shift back a little bit to the policy question. Reverend Quinlan, it seems to me that one of the more powerful arguments made by the Review Commission is that in terms of pension and in particular health care benefits, which were much of the discussion both nationally and by our court and by our legislature, that partners in gay unions don't get the benefit of their partner's health care coverage or pension coverage. And there was some pretty strong evidence, anecdotal and otherwise, presented by the Commission that led it to conclude that that's one of the pillars for its recommendation. Is that a policy issue, a policy outcome that concerns you, that some folks are not getting the advantage of what the legislature thought would happen, which is the benefit, for example, of health care coverage by their partner?
That's still determined by the individual company, and when you're talking about ERISA laws, which is a federal program, there is nothing that the legislature can do to force a company that's involved in a federal program to change. It's not going to change Medicare, it's not going to change Medicaid benefits, none of that is going to change because of something that the New Jersey legislature has done. Now, one of the things that I'd like to address, too, you talked about health care, and I've heard this over and over again about access to their sex partner in a health care situation, which is bogus. I'm a nurse. I worked intensive care, I worked cardiovascular intensive care, I've done med-surg. Never in a nursing situation would we ever deny anyone access to a friend or a loved one, regardless of whether or not they were married to them, civil unionized to them, whatever, as long as that patient wanted access to that individual.
Reverend,
that's bogus.
That's anecdotal, but we know that it is factual, that in fact,
Exactly.
at least until we got to civil unions, that there was a problem for gay partners to have access to the health insurance of the other partner. Not to you a concern?
No, actually, no, it's not a concern. Every individual person, I know of married couples, heterosexual, who have different insurance plans with their each employer, and they both have their own benefits. And they can choose to do that.
That's choice. But if a man and a woman are married, they can get access to the other's health insurance if they need it. That's not true for gay couples, at least not until civil unions. And now the Commission tells us that it hasn't worked in civil unions.
And when you respond, let me throw in one other wrinkle, because you did correctly identify a federal aspect of this. But the Commission at least suggested that in Massachusetts, where the language of gay marriage has been used, the problem is considerably lesser than in New Jersey, where civil unions are. So
actually, the testimony that was before the Commission said that, but the reality that we hear from people who actually live in Massachusetts, we're hearing something different. That didn't change a thing.
So the same problem exists in Massachusetts
Correct.
and New Jersey,
Yes.
lack of access.
But we're making the assumption here that it's still okay for homosexuals to be married and for the state to recognize it as a marriage. It's not a marriage. Marriage is between one man and one woman. And Reverend Elder, the elder never answered your question. I mean, he went into this diatribe, but never answered your question about why is it okay for two men or two women to marry.
I was asked this question.
Elder Taylor, let me
was I asked this question?
Elder Taylor,
I don't think so.
Let me frame a question that I think is close to this one, but goes down a slightly different path. The language of the Commission was that separate was inherently unequal. That is language that directly mirrors the language of Brown versus Board of Education. Yet we know within the black community there are many who resent the comparison between the civil rights movement's focus on race and the same language of inherent inequality in this context. What's your response to the importance of this notion that the Commission advances that separate is inherently unequal and that's unacceptable?
I think that it goes directly to the point that Reverend Quinlan made just a moment ago when he suggested, because of his career in nursing, that he has personally never seen anyone denied. We have had hundreds of testimonies where specifically people can say that a nurse or a medical official was able to say to them, you are not married, you cannot go in. We have had people who were not able to be with their partners in their last moments because of just such separation that comes not necessarily even from the law, but one person who has this precept about what they think about homosexuality and therefore has the power to separate those two people from one another. And the inane and insulting reference earlier to sex partners as it relates to who these people are in loving, committed relationship is the kind of language that slips into this conversation, therefore trying to make homosexual people be some sort of different kind of person.
They are
a partner for the purposes of sex.
They're absolutely
and sex
different.
alone, as opposed to
That's
building
exactly what
loving,
it is.
committed relationships.
No, I lived that
and
lifestyle. I know exactly what it's like. It's not absurd. It's absolutely the truth. I'm talking about what I used to live. I'm talking about the people that I saw. I watched 100 of them die of AIDS. That's exactly the thing that happens.
It's not going to work here because civil
it
rights
is. It's a lifestyle based on
We're not going to hear either one of you.
Okay, Reverend Quinlan, let me be clear. Are you saying that among homosexual partners that relationships are purely sexual and there's no love?
Particularly among the men. Oh, I'm not saying there's no love.
Okay,
no, I never said
I just wanted to be clear.
I'm not saying
so
that.
what is
That's
the difference between you
of
and the elder on this point? What are you differing about?
Well, he's talking about committed, loving relationships,
Right.
which are never among the men monogamous, and I am saying
The men
never.
that
I'm
you
making that
slept with
emphatic
when you were
statement.
So let me be
sleeping
clear.
with
So,
men.
Reverend
So you
Quinlan,
made
you're saying-
bad choices.
Hold
God
on,
bless
Elder,
you.
just hold it 1 second. I want to be clear because nobody hears anybody when you both talk at the same time. You're saying that there are not monogamous, committed relationships among homosexual men.
Absolutely, that is what I'm saying.
Elder,
That's
did
what
you-
I've experienced in the over 10 years that I lived in the lifestyle, watching 100 of my friends and acquaintances die of AIDS.
All right. And Elder, do you want to respond to that?
I think it's ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous.
We got scientific studies that show that it's truth.
I have married couples who made the commitment to step forward and elevate their relationship after already being partnered with one another monogamously for a decade, for 20 years, for 30 years. So to suggest because of whatever circuit parties he went to or whatever lifestyle he lived, that that absolutely no homosexual men around the world, around the country, have committed relationships is the most racist, sexist, stereotypical.
That's
because
baiting.
if you will bark
that
like
is not
one
racist.
dog on one subject,
there's
I
nothing that
guarantee
even
you
compares
will bark like a
homosexual
dog on the
behavior
other.
to what
It's
you were
an
born as a
absurd
black man,
insult.
white man,
and
or a
I'd like
yellow
to hear
man.
what you think about black people
No,
and women
now you're
since
being
you talk
racist.
so absolutely.
Excuse me, Elder, let me ask you, Reverend Quinlan. I understand why this question of gay marriage is critical to Elder Taylor. I'm not sure I understand why it's so important to you. There were all of these predictions about how the American family was simply going to fall apart in Massachusetts if there were gay marriage. Here, when we had the original partnerships talked about, has any of that happened? And why do you care?
Well, why do I care? Let me answer that first. It's because of the truth. The truth is that when we have intact families, which our society for the last 40 years, really since Lyndon Johnson, we've been tearing down the family. And I'm dying of thirst here. If I could get some water, I'd appreciate it. We've been tearing down the family. We've been deconstructing the importance of a father in the relationship. But when we talk about homosexual relationship and how it actually lives out, all we have to do is go to the countries in Europe who have codified homosexual marriage. In a study done by the Amsterdam Department of Health, the Ministry of Health there, they did a study that showed about HIV transmission among men 18 months after they did codified homosexual marriage. In that study, 86% of all new HIV infections happened between committed relationships. Of those committed relationships, and in that 18 years, 80% of them had ended in divorce, and having ended in divorce, they all admitted to zero monogamy.
But
zero.
Reverend, the fastest growing HIV population is among heterosexuals. So this is not really a gay-straight issue, is it? Are we now, let's leave HIV aside and talk about why it's important to you and your vision of the American family to not allow gays to have the same kinds of families call the same thing.
Just today we had a press conference. I really need that water, if I could have that, please.
Patty, water, please.
Just today we had a press conference regarding intact families and how children thrive in an intact family, and the intact family between a mother and a father. I have story after story, testimony after testimony, and now article after article talking about how people who have been raised by homosexuals, either by lesbians or by gay men, talk about the confusion that they grew up with, and some of them have some pretty horrible stories to tell. And you cannot separate HIV from this argument.
Elder, let me ask you a question I asked you before. Do you anticipate, if there are legislative hearings, that the argument about the fidelity or the nature of the relationships among gay men is likely to be hard fought in the legislature or in the committee hearings, or no?
I do not. I think at this juncture we've taken to...
All right, let me ask you then another question, which is that what's happened by the Commission review report and the reaction of the governor and the leaders of the legislature is that what seemed to be a consensus in New Jersey about civil union has been knocked into a top hat. Are you confident that the consensus that's going to emerge is going to be supportive of gay marriage, or do you anticipate several years, months of future of battle over that issue?
The question is to me. I don't.
Yeah.
What I anticipate is an articulate, intelligent, social conversation about how we evolve as a country, how we evolve as a state. I think that as we listen to heartfelt stories from people across the state, that this next step, which we've gone from domestic partnerships to civil unions, and now as we have this conversation, I believe that there will be heated conversation amongst the legislature, as I hope there would be. I would hope that this isn't a blank check kind of an opportunity, but in doing so, that they are going to be reading the full testimonies and listening to the full stories that have come before them, and it would be an atrocity of law to then not make this so. That there are the fight on the other side, if you will, is that as long as the homosexual was painted in this aberration, in this picture, these abominations who only had sex, who only did
me
a
give
certain
Reverend Quinlan
thing.
a chance to respond to the same question. We had a consensus, I think, about civil union. That's off the table. Are you confident that we're going to move in the direction of gay marriage, continued battles, or perhaps a retrenchment back past even civil union?
We will not stop until we see marriage as one man and one woman. Speaking for the majority of New Jersey, speaking for those who are faith-based and those who are not faith-based.
But do you see that as a majority of the citizens of New Jersey? Would you predict that 10 years from now we'll be back to civil unions or even less legal protection?
Well, legal protection. You can talk about legal protection, recognition. Yeah, because it sounds like that.
Okay, but you got 20 seconds to tell me yes or no.
Absolutely not. And the United States has spoken. 30 states now have a state constitutional amendment, including California. That's why we see Garden State equality so beating the bushes down to get this done.
Elder Taylor, last question, very quickly, please. How long before it comes to the legislature, and do you expect to win?
It's got to be 2 words because we're all out.
Yes. Do I expect to win? Yes. How long before it goes to the legislature? I expected it would be before the legislature by the spring of next year.
Great.
How long
Our
before it
thanks
comes out of
to
them?
Reverend
Probably
Greg
within-
Quinlan and to Elder Kevin Taylor. That's it for this edition of Due Process. For Sandy and all of us here, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
Legislature didn't want it to be different and lesser, then it wouldn't have called it something different. So there's something in a label. Marriage makes a word and a world of difference.
But there's also the financial question. This is not going to be cheap. Assuming every one of the 3,000 or 4,000 couples already on civil unions were to get pension benefits and health benefits and on the government expense, that would be very expensive.
Civil unions promise the equality of marriage, and they make some gay couples think, okay, we have equality with civil unions. We don't have to protect ourselves through legal documents like wills and powers of attorney. That's why civil unions are so dangerous. It actually puts people a step back. Only marriage provides equality.
Major funding for due process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy.